The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies and Coat Dance Paints, and also by the generous donations of you, the listener. Thank you to everyone for your support. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 115. Mars Attacks, with guest Jake Thornton. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast with me, your host, Neil Shuck. On today's show we have the first of several conversations with Jake Thornton. Now, you may be aware that on the 4th of October, Mantic Games launched their new Kickstarter for a miniatures game of Mars Attacks, and the game is being designed by Jake Thornton. So I decided it'd be good to have a chat with Jake and find out all about the mechanics of the game, the background, and how the thing will work. Kind of gives people a bit of an informed decision about the game before the Kickstarter finishes. So that's going to be part of the next hour or so. As we mentioned, and I've trailed, I'm actually going to be talking to Jake over the course of 2 or 3 shows about various things that he's been doing over the summer. Looking at Dreadball and Dead Zone and then God of Battles and what have you. Now, before we go on with the show, I just need to give you a quick word of warning. We were having some technical issues recording over Skype. This was recorded on Monday the 7th of October, and for some reason Skype was having one of its moments when it really wasn't quite playing ball. So as well as talking about Mars Attacks and Greenville, Jake actually sounded like he was broadcasting from some brewing cupboard in a basement somewhere in Greenville. So I want to apologise up front for the questionable audio quality at times. I've done my best to clear it up, and hopefully it isn't too bad. But we were certainly struggling. I'm not quite sure why. I think it was just, unfortunately, just one of those things. So we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll be chatting with Jake Thornton.
The eagles have gone. Britain lies defenseless in a cruel world. Since the birth of our Lord, it has been 456 years. What sins have we committed to bring this punishment to Britain? I speak, of course, of the Saxons. They came as allies, but now they seek conquest. The lands of the Britons lie ravaged before them. Blood runs red in our island. We need a leader to stand against them. We need a man to bring together the Britons in common cause. We seek a Dux Britanniarum.
Right, that's enough of that. Dux Britanniarum from Two Fat Lardies. They really are very good.
Well, I'm very pleased to welcome back to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast, Jake Thornton. Hello, Jake.
Greetings, Earthlings.
Welcome back. I mean, it's been, well, I think last time we spoke was probably Salute, wasn't it?
I think probably was, yes.
Yes, and at the time we were talking about Dribble, because we weren't talking about Dribble at all. We were talking about Dead Zone, because if I remember rightly, Dead Zone was launching immediately after Salute, wasn't it?
Yeah, we had a table with some shiny-looking toys on it, and people were talking a lot about that as well. We had the cheerleaders with us as well, if you remember.
Yes.
But, mostly people were talking about, obviously, the key focus was clearly the toy soldiers, not the lovely ladies.
Indeed. Well, since we've spoken, it would seem that you have had one would describe something like a fairly busy summer. Is that correct?
Yes, very busy. Yes, have been. With one thing and another, invasions and everything. They do take up one time. Yes, since we spoke, we've done Dreadball Season 3, and which actually had rather more in it than it should have done in the end. It was a bit of a kind of extravaganza. I think that got loads of stuff in it. And then we did, we've been working on all the stuff for Dead Zone, and of course we now come to Mars Attacks.
Indeed. So what we thought we'd do is we are, over the course of a few shows, going to be talking about all these subjects, and also God of Battles, which
also God of Battles, yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to be covering all these over a number of shows, but in order to try and keep things separate in both of our minds, we thought we'd focus on one thing at a time. Now, we're recording this on the 7th of October, which is the Monday after the launch of the Kickstarter for Mars Attacks.
That's right, yes.
Which, it seemed yet again, sent half the gaming world crazy.
Only half? Fiddlesticks, we missed half.
Yes, I was being somewhat conservative. I mean, yes. I mean, if you thought Dead Zone got funded quickly, yes, Mars Attacks happened to go in half the time, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. It was. I decided I wasn't going to watch. I was just going to worry about let the chaps at the Mantic deal with that. I'm busy trying to squeeze all the wackiness into the rules at the moment. I don't know if you read the comics and looked at the trading cards and stuff. But there's an awful lot of really bizarre things happening.
Yeah, because, okay, can we go right back to the beginning? Because I must admit, the only thing I know about Mars Attacks is the Tim Burton film.
Okay, right. In the beginning, and I will probably get the dates wrong on this, but in the beginning, there was a series of trading cards called Mars Attacks. And this was a set of something like 60 cards that had, on the front, they were a piece of artwork in the style that you have seen. If you've seen anything Mars Attacks, you will know the style I'm talking about. All brash and disintegration rays and so on. And on the back, it had a sort of part of the story. So if you followed all of these cards in order, you got the whole story of the invasion from the very beginning through the vaporizing dogs and giant bugs up until the end, where they well, I won't give the end away, but anyway. And that was a series of trading cards, like football cards or like any of the Magic the Gathering, where you buy them, you buy them unseen and you get to swap them with your mates. And at the time, I think it was the late 60s, several of them were quite risque and they got effectively banned for being either too sexy or too violent. Which of course, these days looking back, you think how ridiculously overweeningly censoring that was. But of course, when they brought them back, they did another pass of this later on in the early 80s, when the first ones they released, of course, were ones that all got banned in the 60s. Just because that's obviously a marvelous plan to do. So they've come back and done this again, several times. And but as I said, it was invented. It came about with this sort of trading card sets. But they've done several sets over the years, and they've brought the story on, and they started doing comics based on the same background and same, telling extra stories within the overall setting of the invasion. And as far as I understand it, the Tim Burton film was basically just simply another way of looking at this background, this IP that they'd created. And obviously, being a movie, it's got lots of people have seen it, and it's very widely publicised. But we're actually working from the original stuff and the new series, because they're just about to launch, I think, this month. I'm not sure what the date is, but they're coming out with a whole new set of cards and more comics and a whole wave more extra stuff. And so what we've got there is a massively larger set of imagery and stories and characters and background to draw from than just the film itself. Even though the film is very widely known, it's only a small part of the whole Mars Attacks kind of story.
Right, okay.
In the same way that when Games Workshop did first got a license to do Lord of the Rings, they only had the license to do the films, not the books. So there was some stuff they couldn't do.
Yeah.
The story's much bigger than the movie, even though the movie's very dramatic, and I do quite like it. Yes, shan't say ack at all. That's bad. Mustn't say ack. Anyway, so what we're basing it on is the whole huge sort of sets and sets of cards with all the artwork and all the comics and all of that. You'll see if you look on the Kickstarter, some of the extra figures we're doing are based on particular ones from the comics, like Henry the Giant Flea and so on, and the Aztec with the big gun.
Yeah.
The sort of Gatling blaster thing. So all of them are really bonkers characters because, of course, the Martians have been invading Earth and been visiting Earth and stealing people from all the way through history. So you get medieval knights and Aztec warriors and American Civil War soldiers and all sorts of people from different periods of history. And then they sort of bring them all back and end up sort of dropping them into Greenville, as we've called it, as our little Mantic bit of the story. Because we're within the whole Mars Attacks universe, we've got a special bit that we sort of developed, the extra bit of the story, that uses all of the sort of big players in the Mars Attacks world and just pulls them together into another story that expands that background and gives us a sort of little playground, a little sandpit within Mars Attacks world to blow everything up, basically.
Right, okay.
Without destroying the rest of their IP. So we get to blow stuff up without completely crippling their nice intellectual property. But at the same time, we still have all of the same, the Novus Virae, the Martian Science Division, the Saucers, the Walkers, the robots, all of that belongs within this as well. It's just we're looking at one place, one little happy little suburban American backwater called Greenville, as the world burns around them. That's where it started. A bunch of cards. Look how far we've come.
So we're looking at the basis essentially from, as I say, although it's collectible cards, yeah, it's very much a comic book sort of universe, isn't it? That's
right. Yeah, it's all this sort of slightly cartoony, but at the same time nasty. They're not the Martians aren't cartoony in a funny way, intentionally necessarily. They're nasty with it. They're malicious little bleeders. Yeah, the artwork is all very bright and brash and quite cartoony. It's very much sort of the artwork has a certain sort of if you're familiar with sort of astounding science fiction and so on, the kind of covers that they used to have on the magazines, very much sort of dramatic.
Yes.
Putting blouses on damsels in distress and sort of giant Martians being evil. It's all a bit larger than life.
Yeah, which is very much a child of its generation, isn't it? Very much a child of 50s and 60s sci-fi was very much in that sort of ilk, wasn't it?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, and they sort of the atomic power, mutating the giant bugs, and all of this kind of stuff is just very much sort of tongue in cheek, looking back at that sort of period, of sort of the glory days of the black and white science fiction, mutant bugs, atomic power kind of thing that was going on in the 50s and 60s. And it's done in glorious Eastman colour or something. This was everything's racked up too bright.
So at what point did the decision get made to say, okay, we're going to go with this as a miniatures game?
Well, I don't know how it all came about, because it was Ronnie doing his cunning, finding out interesting things to do. I don't know whether Tops approached Mantic. I can't remember. I don't really know what was going on, but I'm just a humble wordsmith. The license to do it as a miniatures game was available, right. and I thought that we've got Mantic, that's obviously a miniatures company, and the idea of being able to develop this into a miniatures game I thought was just really attractive, and I think Ronnie thought so. And arranged this possibility, and as soon as because they're sort of relaunching some of it in some way. They said that they've got a lot more comics and a whole new series of cards coming out this month, And that, there's all with all of that, they thought, we could do a game, we could do a board game, we could do a miniatures game, and so on. And Mantic, being a miniatures company, went, "Oh, miniatures game license, yum yum yum." We'll have that bit, and it's I think it suits it very well actually. When we started off looking at this. And we went big invasions. So you want smaller figures, you can have more of them. So you can have a big sea of Martians.
Yeah.
We thought this for a while. Originally we thought we were going to do 50 mil. And then we kind of had another we kind of collectively, we sort of all went away and went kind of, well, that's not quite right, is it? Because what really what makes it not War of the Worlds, what makes it not just another Martian invasion kind of trope thing, is this image of the Martian's face in the sort of goldfish bowl.
Yeah.
And that's the key image. And if you make the model small, you can't see it. So you went, no, that doesn't make sense. No, you can't do it that size. You can't do it tiny. So you have to do it, 28 mil or bigger.
Yeah.
So you've gone for 28 mil because that's the size everybody else is that they make. So that makes sense. They know what they're doing with that size. It means that the Martian figure is really iconically recognizable as that sort of, that Martian from that background. It's very clear that this is the Mars attacks Martian. And I think the figures they've got are just great. They're really, really cool. And I keep nagging them to let me have some early. Because, of course, all the real ones aren't made yet. They're just having to keep prodding them with sharp sticks. Because they're just great. They're just very much things that, as a gamer, you just go, oh, shiny, must have. And there's something about the double domes as well that's just really cool. But yes, they really nailed the Martians, and I think they're going to be a real blast. And it's painted. They just look very, very. They look like all the artwork, And this is, I've read the comics and looked at all the artwork, and it just sort of brings them to life almost, So I think that's really cool. I can't remember. There was a question there. I've ignored it completely and written all the nice tidy plan. Sorry.
That's all right. Right, okay. So we're looking at the miniatures game, and what is immediately apparent, well, at least to me, is that this appears to have at least some of its ideas coming along in the same direction as Dead Zone.
I think that the similarity is more to do with me than Dead Zone, to be honest, because I'm writing both of them.
Yeah.
So, I've got, I do a lot of thinking about what works in what kind of, how dice mechanics work and how action points and systems like that work. And I kind of get to a stage where I go, well, actually, I think this is the best way to do X or Y. And so when I do another game, I'm quite inclined not to just do something different for the sake of it, because I've kind of decided that this is the best way of doing something.
Yeah. So,
and actually, a lot of the similarities are just to do with the fact that you have to have ways of moving, you have to have ways of shooting, you have to have ways, so you have to have ways of, fighting people in hand-to-hand combat. In terms of skirmish game mechanics, you could say, well, it's like, a Mercedes and a Mini both have wheels because wheels are good for cars. There's no link other than that. They both, that's the best way of doing it. So you've got rules for movement in both, rules for shooting in both, rules, and they're action-based, so in a similar fashion. But then, of course, many other skirmish games are also action-based, and they're also have movement, shooting, whatever. I mean, in actual fact, the differences are more obvious than the similarities when you play. If you read the books, what you'll see that the core dice mechanic I used in Dreadball and Dead Zone is also in Mars Attacks. Because it works really nicely and it's very easy to explain to people. And as soon as you've played 2 or 3 turns, people can just be left to play on their own, really.
Yeah.
And because it's nice and simple, and also because it's also quite good to have a house style at times. Because, again, people play one and they like it, and they play the next one, they can pick it up really quickly because they kind of got familiar concepts behind it. The thing that makes it very, very different is the way it feels when you play, what you need to think about to play. So there are 1 or 2 mechanical similarities, but it's really, I think it's much more different than it is the same. Because it's stripped right back to start with. Because you play Dead Zone, and you're worried about the nitty-gritty detail about individual figures all the way through. That's how you work. You need to be kind of, managing the detail of exactly where they're lining up, exactly which action they're taking of quite a large selection of choices. And there's a lot of choice, and there's a lot of detail, and there's a lot of thinking very much about the close detail of what individual figures are doing. Things don't get injured, they just die, unless they're a hero. Normal troops just get wasted by the bucket load. You're not worried about the individual nearly as much. You're worried about the whole force. How are you doing as a whole army? And that's true in every game. You're worried about that, but this is really that's where the focus lies. It's the big brash moves. It's the playing the cards that chuck a car at somebody, or call in artillery strikes and blowing things up in quite large scales. We've got some beta rules we'll put up that may be up by the time this goes out, but they've got the first scenario without any sort of bells and whistles, and that shows you the sort of core of how the machine, the mechanics work. And that shows you there's a very quick, it's very fast to play, but it's very much kind of back and forth between the two players. You don't sit around waiting for things to happen. And on top of that slick engine as a core, there's a whole bunch of other chrome that comes to add on. But basically, you've got this game that is it's very much lighter, and you have less investment in the individual models, if that's making any sense.
It's quite interesting because you talk about the kind of more sweeping scale in one sense, and then previously you turned around and said, okay, when we originally thought about it, we thought about it as 15 mil, and yet actually the 28 mil Martian is a much more iconic figure. So from that side of things, it almost seems you've got two things that are at odds with each other.
You have, but what I've done is, because I've made Mars Attacks very much simpler than Dead Zone, whereas Dead Zone's got a lot of detail to think about and a lot of detailed decisions to make, Mars Attacks you have much less. And because you've got much less to worry about in terms of the individual details, the individual choices that a single model can make, mostly you're thinking about the overall plan. That allows you to deal with twice as many models at once. So you start getting the waves of Martians even in 28 mil. Right. So do you see what I mean?
Yes.
Because the rules are stripped back to the extent that you don't need to think about so much.
Sure. Is some of that to do with also thinking about where the game's going to be marketed? I mean, assuming that because it's a partnership between Mantic and Tops, that it's going to be it's going to be one of these things that is going to be much more potentially much more mass marketed. One would assume, especially in the States, much more so than a Mantic game has been before. So it's much more aimed at potentially a game that could turn up in your local Walmart, for example.
I suppose it could be. I mean, I think I tend to come at things based on the history, based on the background and the IP. And if you look at any of the Mars Attacks stuff, now think about Mars Attacks. Now you've seen the movie. Think about the movie. Think about the cards. Think about the artwork and the imagery you've seen. Now, is that a serious game or not? I think it's not. I think you can't take this too seriously because it doesn't really it doesn't fit. It's not, it's a larger than life cartoon, big heroes, bad villains. It's too kind of, it's death rays and flying saucers. I think you can't take it too seriously. And I think that in the way that you could, with Dead Zone, you can have sort of a degree of worry about real small unit tactics. You can do very much that, and when Dead Zone works well with real small unit tactics, and it works well with the interplay and synergy between different troop types and so on. It's all about that kind of working to do very well. Mars Attacks, it's a cartoon, it's a comic book, it's larger than life, exploding explosions, and it would all be, it's all big bright orange explosions and fancy death rays and
giant fleas, yes.
And a giant flea. And it really doesn't suit sort of staid, slow approach. It suits a fast and light-hearted, light touch with simple mechanics. You can get in and get killing stuff and blowing things up and throwing cars around and exploding giant fleas and whatever it might be that you're doing. But, all of this stuff it needs to happen fast. It needs to be kind of, full of wacky events and strange goings-on. Because that's kind of where it's coming from. It's coming from this comic book, this cartoon, this bright and cheerful, brash artwork. That's driving it. Mm-hmm. And it needs to have rules that accommodate that and suit that. So at the same time, you're right, it's got the potential to be wider appeal because more people know about Mars Attacks, and people will be coming from knowing about Mars Attacks to thinking they could play a game in that, rather than being a gamer and wanting another game. again, so in that sense, it would also argue for being less complicated, so that you can get more people involved without scaring them away by overly complicated rulebooks. So yes, but I think I just come at this, as I said, I look at the background, I watch the movie, I read the books, I read the comics, and look at this, and you go, this is not a sort of serious game in that sense. It's it's got to have big explosions, it's got to have gung ho heroes, it's got to have dastardly Martians. It's got to be larger than life, and oddly, being larger than life means being it means glossing over details. When we think of these archetype heroes, they're archetypes, they're not individual details. They're gung-ho.
Yeah.
Sort of, larger than life. So that's how the rules are designed to go. I mean, at the moment, we're still not quite finished that, because what I've done is, I always say that you've got to get the core right before you can put all the chrome on top.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just end up with a very shiny turd. You've got to have the core of it has to be a proper game that works, and then you can do all of the fancy stuff afterwards. And the fancy stuff's not the hard bit. The fancy stuff's the easy bit. The core stuff is the difficult bit to get to work as a coherent whole. And what we've been playing at the moment, is we've got almost half a card deck to add wacky stuff in, as well as some other bits and bobs, but lots of room to add wacky stuff. But the core is what I'm pleased is working as well as it is. It's giving us a nice, quite a balanced game with enough wackiness, enough kind of mad, last-ditch, heroic kind of things you can do, even without lots of heroes in. It gives you that, it gives you the sense of where you can go with it, and the sort of the solidity of the core mechanics. But again, you can learn in 20 minutes. It's very quick to learn.
Yeah, because one of the questions that I've seen, and very simply comes down to the fact of, okay, so how do you go about making an interesting game and doing game balance between one force that is armed with disintegrator guns and the other force who's averagely armed with baseball bats and monkey wrenches and the odd automatic rifle?
Well, in terms, you've got the American Army, so you've got the GIs on one side, so you've not just got the heroes. And I think what you've got is if you talk about the starting kind of factions, we've got the Martian invasion force, who have the usual sort of turquoise suited guys with disintegrator rifles, and you've got some GIs who are normal GI rifles and stuff, and in the middle of this you've got some sort of civilian heroes who do stuff. And I think you've got to remember that the civilians that you're going to see in the game are not the ones that just got shot or ran away. These are the ones who in some way are special. These are the kind of ones who you see, and the comic book characters, these are the special characters who make a story, who have a story to tell. So they have something about them that makes them a bit special, whether this is because they're really clever, they can understand Martian technology and fly Martian saucers or use the Martian weapons or whatever it might be. And they stand out from the GIs, who are just kind of the equivalent of Martian grunts in kind of position in the world. They're just the rank and file, and there's lots of them, and they're all much the same as each other. Each of the heroes is very different from each other. The average American civilian is not in the game because they run away or being vaporized. It's only the standout civilians that you'll see. The soldiers themselves, the soldiers and the Martians, what we've done with them is balancing. The way I balance these two is they're not balanced. The Martians are better than the GIs, but then not by a lot, but they're actually different as well. This is the key thing is that they don't play the same. You've got the GIs have got longer range shooting, but the Martian disintegrator rifles are more dangerous, and the Martians are better at shooting once they're in range.
Yeah.
The Martians have got armor, and the human armor doesn't do very much against disintegrator rays, so it doesn't count for anything. But the Martian armor doesn't work in hand-to-hand combat, and they've also got, they've got a big glass dome, and if you smash the dome, they've had it. So they're quite vulnerable close up. So you've got Martians who want to be close because they've got short-range weapons, but they're very good at shooting. They don't want to be too close because the humans are better at fighting than they are at shooting. So you've got kind of bit of a flip-flop in who's got which advantage at what range.
Yeah.
We were talking in our for those of you who think this call started half an hour ago, we had an hour and a half preamble. We were talking an hour and a half preamble about ranges for weapons. And we've got, again, here is a reason why it works very nicely in a game where the range of the disintegrator rifle is shorter than the range of the GI's weapon. And what this means is that it forces you to move in certain ways. It forces the kind of interaction and position on the table, which creates the story and creates the battle. Which is, again, without having loads of complex rules that say you must do this or you must do that, you naturally move into the range that suits you best. When you're playing, you look at this range of your gun, you go, right, I've got a range of 4, I've got a range of 6. I want to be within that range. And so people play the tactic that is appropriate for their force simply because that's what they need to do. And you don't have to, you don't say you must move into 4 square range. If you don't want to shoot him, you don't have to. Stand at 5 or 6 or 10 or whatever. I don't mind. You just won't shoot him very well at that range because your gun doesn't go that far. So it gives you a sort of interesting sort of dynamic. How do you balance them? Well, you balance them because you play in scenarios. That's the other way you balance things. Because you play in a scenario that we've played 50, 60 times that we know comes out, half the time one lot win, half the time the other lot win. So the first scenario, for example, has got, I think it's 8 GIs and 5 Martians, I think, off the top of my head. But, that's an even fight.
Right.
Because they're not the same. But also the other thing is that the card decks, that each one has access to card abilities that aren't the same as the other side, so they work differently. So there's a slightly different dynamic to the way the different sides work. Well, it's got majorly different in some certain aspects, but it means that some of them are more survivable than others. So again, it's not just what stats are and how many models you've got, it's what cards they're playing because which force they've got. But yes, you play scenarios, and the scenario is set up to be a balanced game, even if the numbers aren't balanced or the positions aren't balanced, because you've got all these things you can vary in a scenario to make the game balanced and fun, even if one side is being shot to pieces, because it may not be their objective to survive the whole game, or for everybody to survive, or it may not actually be the objective of the people who are doing the shooting to pieces for them to kill anybody. Maybe they're after to do something else, so shooting to pieces doesn't actually matter, doesn't help them. They don't win by doing that. So there's many other ways of balancing it, even if the Martians are, yes, a bit naughty and run around disintegrating everybody.
Okay, so from your point of view, obviously you've got a set of mechanics and a game designed around, I suppose, a spec that you were given for the base game. How do you go about sorting things out? How much of a scope are you given, especially when you've got a Kickstarter that suddenly takes off and suddenly goes in directions that you didn't originally think you were going to get anywhere near? Is that something that you just make the decision and say, I'm sorry, we've only got so much room to do so much, and anything else automatically becomes an expansion? And then, that obviously generates its own set of issues regarding, as you say, how do you start balancing things like giant insects?
Well, the breaking things up into what can go in the box, what can go in an expansion, and so on, is really kind of the guys at Mantic work all that kind of stuff out. They just tell, I just say, how many men are we going to get in the box? Because when I'm writing scenarios, obviously you need to know that the box has 10 or 12 or 57 or 391 or whatever many models it is.
Yeah.
Because I want to use them all in the final scenario. I want to use, somewhere along the line, I want to use everything that I got in the box, but I don't want to use all of them I've got in the box because otherwise people are going to shout at me. So there's in terms of what I'm writing, there's sort of limitation on the grounds of what the product actually physically has. If it's got 10 flying saucers, then they need to be in. If there's no flying saucers, then we need to not put flying saucers in. At the moment, as I said, what I'm doing when the Kickstarter is live, I'm in this situation where I can focus on the core rules, which I know need to work, and the more solid the core rules are, the better. But in terms of the sort of end list of stuff I need to be doing, and heroes I need to have rules for, and types of giant bug there need to be, or whatever it might be, I don't know that yet, because obviously the Kickstarter and how well the Kickstarter does will dictate all sorts of things that might happen in terms of the overall list of what we can do. So that's another reason why I'm focusing on the core rules, even if I wasn't designing the way I normally do, which is build on that strength to start with. I would have to, because I can't tell you what in 20 days or however long we've got left, I can't tell you what list we will have of heroes or giant bugs, or whether we're going to get robots or flying saucers or tanks or jeeps, or I don't know. I can't tell you because I can't see the future. I can tell you what we'd like to have in it, but that's not the same thing. And we've talked about what would we do? What kind of cool things would we have? What's in the background? What kind of stuff do we see in the in the comics, in the background of the cards? What do we have? And so there are all sorts of cool stuff we could do. If you read the background and you look at the comics and so on, you'll know there's the Novus Virae, and they've got these kind of agents, and you'll know that there's big Martian robots of various different sizes, and there's flying saucers which look really cool, and there's sometimes the GIs use tanks, and they have jeeps, and they have all sorts of stuff. So we could do all of these, so they all fit the background. And if we get a chance to do them, then that's great, we'll do them. But would that be a supplement or the main game? I don't know. I mean, I think you want to have something where the main game isn't a sort of, hugely bloated £400 extravaganza. You want something that you can pick up and play and go, yeah, that's really cool. But I don't know. As I said, this is the point. This is where people out there in internet land really actually genuinely have an ability to make a difference, because what we get pledged is what we've got to build a game out of. And if nobody pledges, we make a smaller game than if everybody pledges.
Yeah.
With Dead Zone, with that sort of Dead Zone and Dreadball, what I ended up with in the list of things to design was way bigger than we thought we were going to have to start with. And so that just gives me a big long list of stuff that I have to make that needs to fit into all of the things we've already got. And this is why I said it's so important to make the core really robust, because if the more robust it is, the more you can do wacky stuff on it, and it doesn't have a problem. But I think what you get to is you get this thing where it just adds more choice. People aren't going to ever use everything all at once, but it'd be really cool if you had another faction to play. So it's not just the humans and the Martians. You could do the Martian Science Division as a separate one, or the Novus Virae as a separate one, or the Tiger Corps, or whatever. There are other factions you could have, and the ability to. I mean, with Dead Zone, we started off with 4 factions. Or did we start off with 2? I can't remember. Anyway, we ended up with 6. That's great. That means that people won't play all 6 at the same time, obviously, but they now have the option to play Forge Fathers or Asterians as well as the others. And they will be in an expansion, because that's the kind of, you've got to draw the line somewhere. 4 forces in the original box,
yeah,
which is quite enough. But the same thing will happen with Mars Attacks. I mean, you'll go, right, this is, we've got to a certain point, and you go, actually, that's enough for a box set. That's enough for a starter. That gives everybody, enough to play a really cool series of games, and these story-driven scenarios that give people all sorts of different interesting challenges. And at the end of it, they'll get to this point and the final showdown between General Tor and some of the heroes. And then you've got this big story arc, and that's kind of told that story. And then you may have an expansion that has, I don't know, giant bugs and tanks or whatever. And that's a whole other different story arc with all sorts of other things going on. And I think again, if you think of it in terms of stories, it makes it clearer if you put less things in all at once. You can tell a clearer story, because and as I said, with Dead Zone, going back to that, you've got the Asterians and Forge Fathers kind of as a pair of extra ones to come in, so we could do some scenarios just around them. You've got a series of a kind of narrative campaign that's sort of a block on its own. You've got a bunch of stuff with zombies and so on. So looking at how that works, you can see the little sort of groupings of things that made sense to go together. And you'll get the same thing with Mars Attacks as we go on. I don't know what they'll be, but I'm sure we'll find things where they go together as little groups, little sets that make sense, and you can tell a story around.
Yeah.
But this is one of the slightly nerve-wracking, perturbing, but very exciting things about Kickstarter is that I'm writing a game and I don't know how big that is. until a month's time. When it finishes, then I'll know what this whole list of stuff needs to be. I can tell you that we start off with Martians and some heroes and some GIs, and I can do a game based on that. And I'm going to make that, and I'm going to kind of keep a weather eye open for how would I do saucers, how would I do robots, how would I do giant bugs. I can think about how all of that might work. But and as long as the structure is there to support all of that, if it happens, then if I can support all of that, then I can probably support a whole bunch of other stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, as I previously said, once you get into the realms of things like flying saucers and giant robots and giant bugs and what have you, that is all of a sudden edging towards a different scale to what you're ending up with GIs versus Martians, with the odd hero here and there. Is it? Yeah, in some ways it becomes a different scale game, but at the same time, you're at this point where, hang on a second, this is where we've designed this around.
Well, and also that you design it so that it's simple enough that it can cope with being a bigger game.
Yeah.
Because the more complex it is, the slower it becomes if it becomes a game we play on 2 mats or 4 mats. And I think it's simple enough, certainly, that, I haven't been playing it as a 4-mat game, but certainly if we just doubled or tripled the army, the forces on each side, you could have quite an entertaining game doing that. And it does have quite a big body count, I'm afraid. I've done that again. But it suits. It suits the, you read the comics, nobody survives being shot very often unless they're a hero. There's an awful lot there's a very high body count in these comics. And there's a real sort of cavalier attitude to just vaporizing whole squads of troops. So I've kind of gone down that route a bit with the game, and it's unlike Dead Zone, people don't get wounded; they just get dead, with the exception of some of the heroes. But basically, troopers, GIs, and Martians, they get hurt, they get taken off, which makes things much more kind of brutal, fast, and sort of comic-y. As I said, it's very kind of cartoony. You're dead.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Zap, you're gone. Boom, you're dead. So there's very kind of quick cycling, which I think will suit quite larger games, a bigger model count, even on the same count.
So we've talked around the fact of, obviously we're looking at a similar sort of board setup to what we saw in Dead Zone with an 8x8 grid in the standard 2-foot board, and similar, and as you say, with the mechanics of movement and shooting, keeping the opposed dice rolls.
Yeah. I like opposed dice rolls. I think opposed dice rolls make you feel much more involved.
Oh, very much so, yeah. From all the things of playing Dreadball and Dead Zone so far, the one great thing is that you're always involved in what's going on, even if it doesn't happen to be your turn. Okay, it's slightly different with Dead Zone with the alternate activations and what have you, but it's still a case of you involved all the time.
Yeah, and I like that. I mean, I like that kind of game where you're busy. If you shoot me, I at least feel like I've got some sort of responsibility for what happens. But I get to roll the dice, and I could roll really well and roll loads up and save myself. So I think I enjoyed that, and it suits some people. As long as it suits some people, then that's great.
So here we are, 4 days into the Kickstarter at this point, and as you've been saying, an awful lot of where we go from here depends on what we end up with in a month's time. So
absolutely, yeah. I mean, it sounds trite, but it's absolutely true. I mean, I don't have a list of what I am designing yet in terms of stat lines for different creatures and races and monsters and vehicles and whatever, because I don't know what the Kickstarter fund is, and I won't until month's time. So it's a strange place to be. I can play the game with the basic game with you now, and I have been playing the basic game for a while. But what the whole game will have in it, I don't know. It's intriguing. It's like Christmas morning. You don't quite know what's in the box yet.
As you say, from from a game design point of view, when you're attempting to design what is effectively a bit of a moving target, it has its own set of challenges, isn't it?
It does, yes, absolutely. But as I said, I focus on making the core as robust as possible, because that gives me the best fighting chance of making sense out of the rest of it.
Okay, so we're looking at it coming, the game being launched. I think it's August next year, isn't it?
Can't honestly tell you, to be honest. I mean, I will have finished my work and be on to the next project and the one after that by that point. It's whatever it says on the Kickstarter.
Yes, I'm this is prepared. I'm frantically looking at this point in time.
It'll tell you on the Kickstarter on the bottom of the pledges. It's sometime next year is all I can remember. But I mean, these things take a long time, because you've got tooling and plastic tooling and so on, which is always a months and months long process. And then shipping from wherever it gets done, which should probably be China, I imagine, in part. But you get stuff made all over the place. I think something being printed in Lithuania for Dead Zone. I mean, there's stuff comes from all over the shop. But then you've got to get it shipped and so on. So that it just the simple logistics of producing any game is just going to take you months to do. And if you don't know what you're doing until the music stops, as it were, then you can't even start the physical production until that point. So yes, it's going to be next year sometime.
Yeah, so I was just checking. It's August 2014, and obviously, say at least by that point you'll know exactly what you're producing and how many supplements you've got to write, and yes. So right, okay.
All by then. All be written by then.
Oh yeah. I mean, typically on something like this, how long is it? I mean, this is something I suppose we'll keep coming back to with other things. But how long does it actually take you to get through something like this? I mean, okay, maybe from Mars Attack's point of view, you already had a starting point because you'd been through the mechanics as far as Dead Zone was concerned, and got to a point where you thought, okay, I'm happy with the way this set of mechanics work. Now let's just tweak them in order to, deal with a slightly different situation. But typically, how long will you spend on something like this?
Well, it does depend on a lot. I mean, you say we had the Dead Zone mechanics, but actually that's kind of, it's like getting, I was talking about cars before. You get your car, you strip down the bodywork, you take all the seats out, you remove the engine, you take out the drive shaft, and you end up with 4 wheels, and you go, right, that was great, we love the wheels, let's start again. And you go, well, actually, Mars Attacks was stripped back to almost nothing before it was built up again in terms of a game design. So there's as I said, the way the game works is, on the face of it, there are 1 or 2 mechanical similarities with Dead Zone, but the way it works overall, and the balance, importantly, the way it balances the bits go together is completely different. I don't know, how long do I spend on it? Months. But I tend not to do one thing at a time. I tend to be doing more than one thing at a time these days. Okay. So it's sort of back and forth between, I'll do some of one thing, we'll play test it a bit, we'll kick it around, we'll get the feedback, and then we'll make some changes. So there's a lot kind of back and forth. And also there's other things to do that whatever the last thing was that you finished 6 months ago will be then in its release stage or something like that. So you'll be doing stuff about that. So because when I finish it, it's nowhere near when the public get it, usually. Mm. Then there's a 6-month gap, and then the public get it, and they go, oh, new and exciting, and I go, well, I can't remember how it works anymore because I've been doing 3 things then. So, I mean, I wrote a piece on my blog years ago about, well, it feels like years ago, but about, if you ever accost me at a gaming show and ask me about the new latest shiny thing that came out last week, do not be surprised if I look at you slightly blankly because I can't remember how it works.
Yes, I remember reading that one. yes, excuse me, I've written 3 different sets of rules since then. Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah. I think that the other thing that is kind of irrelevant for Mars Attacks, but people always assume that I'm going to be good at playing my own games, and that's not necessarily the case because because I do so many different things. I never get to be really, really the best player in the world with any of them. I'm busy, chopping and changing, doing different stuff. But I'm busy working out how I can fix a bit that might not be quite right, or add a new troop type, or put a new hero in or whatever it might be. So I'm kind of deconstructing things in my head rather than playing them most of the time if it's something I wrote. How long does it take? It sort of never really ends. It keeps going because I keep doing the sort of the Qs and questions and articles and stuff on the blog. So I keep going. But I suppose the core work is probably done in about 3 months. But then does that count expansions? There's always there's expansions and there's where it could go next. And there's campaign things and extra scenarios, and so these things are mostly kind of bits of how long is a piece of string kind of thing. Yeah, there's not enough hours in the day, basically. There's always something. There's always another cool idea. Somebody will say something, and you go, "Oh, it'd be really cool if you did X, Y, or Z," and you go, "Yeah, oh, that'd be really good." You can always tweak things. You can always improve. I think it's like anything else. When you think you can't get any better, you think there's nothing to learn, then you might as well stop. Yeah. Whatever it is you're doing, if you think you know everything, then you don't. You've just given up. So I think there's always, most people I know, it's like when you talk to actors about films that they're in, or people who are writing, authors about writing books and stuff. When you ask them which is their best one, they often say either the one they're doing or the one they're about to do, because that's the exciting thing that has all the promise. They've not finished it yet. Because when you finish something, you always know what you didn't quite like about it, what didn't work perfectly, what wasn't quite the way you had in your mind's eye originally. And everybody I talk to, whatever creative thing that they do, whether it's writing music or acting or writing books, they always say the same thing. It's very much kind of when you finish something, whatever the project is, you lock it down, and it goes out to the big wide world as this is it, it's finished. Most people who are good at what they do see the things that could have been better, and try and learn from that, so that the next time they can do anything better. So I think it's funny. It's like the best thing you ever do is the one you're just about to finish.
Isn't it always?
Always true. It's always just you're already really excited about the one you're just about to finish because that has the most promise, and that could be right. That could be the one that is perfect until it's finished. At which point there was something that didn't quite work the way you wanted. But like I said, if you don't think like that, then you've probably given up.
Yeah. Okay. So following that, then in future conversations, we're going to come back to the stuff that obviously wasn't as good as what you're doing at the moment because it's stuff you've done in the past.
Well, yeah, and yes and no. I mean, you get the. For example, God of Battles, which is one of my favourite designs I've ever written. I really, really like it. It's one of the games I play when I have time to play for myself, for my own amusement. Yeah, it's one of the games I play, and that has a number of typos in it, and there's a couple of bits and bobs that could have been better. But overall, I can look at that and say, actually, no, I really like that. I'm really proud of that. It's one of the things. Oddly, I mean, it's in terms of sales, it's done hardly anything compared to Dreadball and Dead Zone and all of these much fancier games. We were talking about this earlier, probably not on the actually recorded bit, but yeah, I mean, the quality of the game, your attachment, not the quality, but your sort of affection for a game, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with its popularity. I mean, I had a phase of playing a game called Pig Tickler that was, I think it's Eureka Games. Very silly, Victorian gentlemen soldiers riding around on unicycles, chasing a mechanical pig with lances. Anyway, like I said, I've been involved in gaming for a very long time and have all sorts of I like obscure games because I find all sorts of little gems in corners. Yeah, so having affection for things doesn't necessarily have anything to do with them being widely available, popular, or anything else. But as I said, I really was very fond and very proud of God of Battles, which is something that even though it has, I know the details that were wrong, or the details I would like to have been different, but it doesn't affect my overall liking of it and the overall. I think overall it's fine. The details are just, little details. I mean, most of which no one but me will notice. because I'm a perfectionist and, did editorial and layout and all of this and think about how exactly it could have been laid out slightly differently. It would have just made this little bit of difference, but nobody else will ever care about or know about or notice. But because I was doing it, I will know that. And then, of course, when you do this, having worked a workshop, we dealt with various editions of Warhammer, for example. You do a new edition, you fix the mistakes from the last edition, and you make a new bunch of mistakes somewhere along the line. None of them are ever perfect. They're just different. And each of the editions of Warhammer that we worked on wasn't perfect, but did fix the previous edition's problems, but generally had some emergent issues with the new version. Whatever you'd done somehow didn't quite fix everything perfectly the way you thought it had. And something, 6 months down, year down the line, tournament players have worked out some way of breaking something else, and you go, oh, well, we probably fixed that bit. Oh, no, we did fix that bit, but now we found something else to do. But this is, it's in a weird way. That's kind of what they're there for.
Yeah.
I think you can't make things perfect, but you can make things really cool. And I think this is it. I think, as I said, I think this is not just about gaming. This is about the way in which creative people work. Whether you're designing a new game, you're writing a new book, you're composing a new symphony, the people who are good, if you read the memoirs of people who do these kinds of things, they always get really anguished about not quite perfect. Almost being there, but not quite being there. There's always a little bit they could improve. And I think this is it. This is the quest for the perfect game. And we were talking about that as a gamer, wanting the perfect game and liking a particular period of history and collecting all the different rule sets for that period. I used to collect Greek naval warfare games, and I had about 15 of them. And that bit's really good in this game, and that bit's really good in that game, but this bit doesn't quite work, and that bit's really good there. Never quite get the perfect one. And you try when you're designing the same thing. You try and get make the perfect game. But there's always something that doesn't, there's always a lack of perfection somewhere. Maybe that facet on this diamond isn't quite perfect. And you'll know next time. It'll be better next time. Does this make me sound like all my games are rubbish? I take a great deal of pride and effort in doing the best job I can, and I think, I'm not perfect. I'll try to do the best job I can, and that's, the most I can do. And the fact that most people play them without any qualms or quibbles is, I think is endlessly cheering. I think it's making something that people enjoy and have fun doing. I think it's just great.
Well, it's been great to speak to you, Jake, about Mars Attacks, and certainly looking forward to see what comes out in the over the next few weeks and months. As we hinted at the start of the show, this is the first of several conversations we're going to have, talking about various things that you've been doing. So I say, thank you for joining us tonight.
You're very welcome.
And I look forward to speaking to you again really soon.
Yes, look forward to it.
Okay. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is very happy to be sponsored by Coat d'Arms Paints. Now, Coat d'Arms have been supporting miniatures painters with their products for well over 20 years in some way, shape or form. Their current range is 150 sets of acrylic paint, which are available both as individual colours, but also in paint sets depending on period. Things such as the Ancients paint set, the World War II German, World War II American, World War II Russian paint sets, and they also include things like an ACW set and even a Horsetown set. That's one way to purchase your paints. And they also do triads. Now, if you're a fan of the 3-colour system made famous by the likes of people like Kevin Dallimore, you may like to purchase your paints with a dark shade, a medium shade and a highlight. And the triad system from Coat d'Arms allows you to do this. They also have ranges of textured paints called Brushscape, which allow you to paint from textures onto bases as well as colour. And these are ideal especially for smaller scale models. And if you're a fan of the dip method of painting, then Coat d'Arms have their own product available called Super Shader. This is available in light brown, dark brown and black. Coat d'Arms paints have a whole range of products available to try. Check them out at www.blackhat.co.uk and be sure to tell them that we sent you. Well, I hope you found that to be an interesting conversation. I must admit, from a personal point of view, I don't find the whole Mars attacks thing particularly interesting. From my side of things, when I'm looking at alien invasion, I'm much more into something like XCOM, for example. So I'm much more liable to look at something from that sort of universe, as opposed to 60s, 70s sci-fi. All that said, some of the things are quite interesting. I mean, again, looking at the scenery, much in the same way as they did for Dead Zone and what have you. Looking at this ruined scenery, and another couple of bits and pieces they're doing is quite interesting. Certainly, again, the deluxe playmats look very nice. One imagines they're going to be a similar construction to the Dead Zone ones. That's one of the reasons I got involved with that. So, whilst I'm not particularly interested in the IP, certainly some of the extras around the edges, certainly kind of maybe sit up and go, ooh, that looks interesting. So certainly at the moment, from my point of view, it's a Kickstarter to keep an eye on, to see what they're producing, whether they're going to be producing, certainly looking at, maybe extra scenery sets or what have you. As I say, they produce an awful lot with Dead Zone in the end, and it might be something that they'll end up doing here as well. And obviously, this is the sort of thing that can be used in several different games. And again, I suppose there is a potential there to adapt the rules for your own particular alien invasion scenario. And from that sort of things, it's almost worth one of those things of me, I'm a bit of a rules collector anyway, so it's probably worth having a look at these rules just as a comparison to what Jake's done with Dead Zone. So we'll see how it goes. In the meantime, I'll be back with another conversation with Jake in the near future. So until then, take care, happy gaming, and I'll speak to you very soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you want to know more about Meeples and Miniatures, there are several things you can do. First of all, you can visit the website at www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. If you want to contact the show at all, you can email me at neil@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. You can follow the show on Twitter. Simply look for M&M Podcast, or click the follow us on Twitter button from the website. We also have a group on Facebook. That's the Meeples and Miniatures Podcast Fan Club. Again, follow the link from the website. And finally, if you want to help us to support the show, you can always donate to the podcast by clicking the PayPal button on the donate page, again found on the website. Once again, thank you for listening. I hope you've really enjoyed the show. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.